big welcome back to Empower Her Podcast. And we have Ashley Levin with us today, all the way from California, USA. Ashley is a trauma therapist turned feminine empowerment mentor who has spent 20 years studying the emotional blueprint that shapes people's lives. A very big welcome back to Empower Her Podcast. And I'm really, really excited that Ashley is a part of Empower Her. Ashley is actually chapter 19, and 1 and 9 is 10. So new beginnings. Love that. It becomes a 1, right? And the chapter is from ashes to wings. So I can see a little bit of a play there, and I love it. From ashes to wings, what I had to release to rise. And Ashley, this is so important. I just want to read a quote before you jump in. You rise the moment you release the stories that keep you small. And, I think some people discover this younger, some people discover this older, some people discover and go, oh, I wish I knew this when I was younger, but it's like, wow, you know it now. You rise the moment you release the stories that keep you small. And you start with, there are dates you forget, and then there are dates the whole world remembers. March 19, 2020, California was shutting down. And I think this is a great place to start. You said I was not just unhappy, I was drowning on dry land. I absolutely love your chapter. I love the sentences that you have in here that stick with you. And I'm sure our listeners have felt at different times that I was drowning on dry land. So can you take us back to there and let us know what you were talking about?
Yeah, I was miserable in my life. I had spent most of my career working in community mental health. And the interesting part about community mental health, and I learned this kind of going into this, is that they don't really care very much about their employees. And it's a lot about kind of what they can get out of you. And it's like, you got one last drop of blood left, we're going to take that from you. And I'd spent a lot of my career, like I'd spent time as a therapist, and then the last like 10 years of my career as a supervisor. And being in middle management's hard. It's like you're always trying to take care of the people below you and then satisfy the people above you. And it was really hard because I was at this company that was just extremely toxic. Um, we had I think I was there 2 years. In the 2 years I was there, a 90% turnover rate of our therapists. And I just, it was like I kept giving more and I didn't know what else I could do. And so here I was in this career and I was doing that. And then in my own life, I just felt depressed. It was like nothing was making me feel better. I had been in therapy, I started in therapy when I was 12 and, gone through some time with that and with that therapist and then gone back at different times in my life. But it never felt like anything was getting to the root cause of why I was feeling so depressed. And I had gone through different points in my life where I was on antidepressants, and I just felt like, yeah, that kind of made things kind of calmed a little bit more, but it didn't make me happy. It didn't fix the problem. I just didn't feel quite as depressed. And I had a really low self-esteem for most of my life. And that was one of the things that I had worked on in therapy, was trying to fix that. And again, nothing seemed like it ever got to the root. And so here I was at this point where I was like, I can't keep living this way. Like I feel like I'm faking my happiness all of the time and just trying to like stay above water. Like, just that drowning feeling is like, how do I just keep going and just keep pushing through and just surviving? And so I got to this point on that day, I was like, I just can't do this anymore. So we've got this 2-week period we're going into a lockdown, and might as well like make this the time that I really put this effort into myself. At that time, we thought it was 2 weeks. It turned out to be months. And here we are years later, and I'm still doing this work on myself. And I love every minute of it.
I love that. I love that you love every minute of it. And just for our listeners, it's interesting because sometimes we start this path, and a lot of people, I always go, okay, who's ready to work internally? No one really wants to work internally. But once you start, it really is fun. Like, I love it because you learn so much. And I'm just going to read a couple of snippets, like a snippet from a few paragraphs leading down to my next question. You were done expecting something external to fix an internal problem. You didn't want to cope, you wanted to change. I did not want to survive my life, I wanted to rise inside it. I am coming out of this better than I'm going in, is what you said around that COVID time. And you did not know it then, but that was the moment that you did begin to rise. So you move into seeing the stories. I began noticing the stories I was telling myself. So once again, I'm just taking little snippets. You know, if someone took an hour too long to text back, my mind instantly began to spiral, filling the blanks. You know, they hate me, they don't want to get back to me, they're done with me. All these things that people are, you know, we have tens of thousands of thoughts every day that go through our head. And we continually make up stories for the next person. They roll their eyes. They might have been thinking, oh, shit, I've left the iron on. But next minute, it's about me, right? Um, it was, you wrote, it was almost impressive how quickly I could turn nothing into something. Wow. And you know, our brains, especially the women's, everything is connected, right? It was almost impressive how quickly I could turn nothing into something. What struck me was not just the speed of the stories, but the certainty behind them. And I love that because this is happening to everyone, even right now. Um, it's the speed of the stories, but the certainty that you can create beyond these stories. My brain did not say, maybe she's upset. Um, it didn't suggest things. It just gave it to you as if it was fact. So you went on, I was reacting to the version of my life I had created in my head. Let's jump into your head for a little moment and just discuss this because honestly, you know, out of every audience I have of 100 people, at least 95 is experiencing this as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, like you said, we have all these thoughts that go through our head, like seconds, multi-seconds or whatever. And we think that everything that we think is true. And most of us don't stop and question whether or not they are. We just assume because we've always thought it that it has to be true. And honestly, there's very few things in life that are really facts. Most of it is a belief, an assumption, a thought, whatever it might be. But true facts rarely exist. And so, if you and I can see it in a different way or come to a different conclusion on it, or whatever, that's a belief. It's not a fact. A fact is that there is no way of disputing it. It is what it is, and it's always that way. And we believe in our heads that that's the case. And so I never really stopped and was like, okay, well, why do I think this? Where is this coming from? It was always just that it was true. And so I had been so conditioned in my life to think something was wrong with me. Of course, whatever's going on is going to be about me. I did something wrong. And until I had this like chance to really stop and look at it and think about, okay, well, could it mean something else? And understand that these are stories that I tell myself because of past things that happened in my life. I'm continually repeating that same information, the same proof that I've gathered throughout my life that says, yes, this is the case, this is the case. And we're continually gathering proof.
Yeah, I love that. Continually gathering proof to back our stories we make up in our head, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I know so I love what you've written because I relate so well. My TED talk was think before you speak, you know, because what we believe isn't always true. Facing what I had been avoiding. Every story I told myself existed because on some level it had served me. And this is what happens a lot of times, these stories that suddenly pop in, you know, it's to protect us, to look after our ego, for instance. So we don't look bad when we look right. All of this. To see them not as flaws or failures, but as old strategies. So this is what you had to do, was to start to see them as old strategies. Because what happens is everyone goes, oh, you get a negative idea about someone, quick, put in something positive. But I loved how you said you weren't believing it. It wasn't a true story. You were just throwing in a positive, but it didn't stick with you. And this was something I remember reading, with Eckhart Tolle, is that thoughts come in, like just acknowledge it. Okay, great. Thanks for trying to protect me, but that's not going to serve me, and to let it go. And what you really did was look at what is real right now. And when you were saying about facts, because when I work with businesses on having those difficult conversations, if someone is always late, we don't speak about attitude, start clocking in the time, okay, so that you can have that conversation. So Tuesday, it was, 9:15, you walked in the door. Da, da, da. So you can have those facts and take that emotion out of the conversation, because once that emotions in there, we've all got 1,000 stories around it. So to see them not as flaws or failures, but old strategies, I love that. Outdated, yes, but once necessary. So it really is a way of giving a little bit of grace to our old stories as well. So we can let them go kindly.
Yeah.
All right. Let us know a little bit more about that. Thanks, Ashley.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of work that gets done on talking to people about the stories that they tell and looking at that. But I feel like very rarely do we look at why they benefit us. And I think that that's such an important thing to see why we keep choosing that story, because we go to things because it benefits us. And usually when I say that to people, they're like, no, there's no benefit. It's just like all these negative consequences. Yeah, but those negative consequences or outcomes or whatever can be benefits. And a lot of times, that benefit is like how it's protected us or, what it does for us. So, I get clients oftentimes that are, we can say, well, uh, this belief like keeps me stuck. Like I won't do anything different. Like, because this thing keeps me stuck. I was like, well, that's a benefit to you. Now you don't
Yeah.
have to risk anything. Now things
Yeah.
don't have to change. So you get to live this exact life that you feel comfortable in. That's a benefit.
Mm.
And once you can see why you keep choosing that thing, that benefit, then you can decide whether or not that's the benefit you still want to have. Because, well, what would happen if you didn't choose that? Now,
Yeah.
what's the benefit of that? Well, now if I'm not stuck, I'm moving forward and I'm doing the things that I want to do and I'm feeling this way or whatever. It's like, okay, do you want that benefit or do you want this other benefit? Now we get to look at what our choices are. And so to me, like that's a big thing, is understanding why we do the thing we do, what we get from it.
And yes, and for our listeners, depending on your natural raw behavior style, uh, your stories might be bigger and greater and more, and you believe them more. And also, we form a lot of these stories between 7 and 9, these patterns, like you were saying, these patterns that you help people break, because of these times. And they did serve us once. It doesn't mean being held back is going to serve us in our future. And I love that you wrote the tiny pause changed everything. Because I always say in my talk, small tweaks make the big differences. And this is a small tweak, taking that pause before believing what was coming into your head. Seeing differently did not solve everything. It made me feel more present, more grounded, and more awake to myself. And I think that's what that pause does. It brings you into this present moment. No, they may not have got back to me. Maybe they haven't even seen the message yet. you know. So that's fantastic. And then you said finding the truth instead of positivity. And I think this is a great area to speak on for our podcast listeners as well.
Because so often, like you said, like we try and just think positive. And thinking positive, again, it doesn't get to the root of what's going on. We're just trying to like push the other thing aside. Like, I don't like you. I don't want you. You're bad. You're negative. So now let me cover you up with this positive. But if you don't believe it, then it's just you're going like against this, what's coming at you. And so it just takes more effort and more effort. And so if you can just understand what part of this am I not believing? Like, where's the challenge in this? So you look at a new story and you're like, like, okay, well, yeah, like I think that, but there's something in your body that is just not hitting right and resonating with. It's because there's part of you that doesn't believe it's true. So get rid of whatever it is that's causing you to not believe it's true. Once you believe it's true, then your body feels it, and everything gets released when you can feel it in your body. Um, and so I think that thinking positive is a good thing only if what's positive is true.
Yeah. I love that. And for the listeners, I think this is one of the biggest shifts is having that pause. You cannot build a new story on top of a lie. And you went on to say, I did not need a positive story. I needed a true one to stop all this negativity, all these thoughts that, can bring on that feeling of depression, etc. So integrating the new truth. Once I started telling myself stories that were actually true, something in my life began to change. What began to change with the true stories?
I could start seeing what was really true, and instead of thinking everything was about me in one way, like that this is happening because I've done something wrong. And so the truth is, it just like opened doors to see all sorts of possibilities of what could be going on instead of everything being about me. And that's something that we all do. It's like every story is usually about us. So once we can identify what's the story you're making about you in this situation, where most of the times things have nothing to do with us, like somebody is just being themselves. And so when I was able to see, like, oh, like that person didn't get back to me just because they were busy, or, maybe they really wanted to sit down and answer what I had to say, like my text or whatever, thoughtfully. So instead of just rushing to do it, now they're taking time to do it because it matters more. And when I was also able to communicate to people how I felt about something or ask questions and get more clarity, I was able to see how all these things that were going on in my head, these stories I had been telling myself, were all lies. They were fake. Like none of these things that I thought were actually happening were, because I was able to talk to people about it and ask questions and get clarity around it and say, oh, I felt like this. And they were like, oh, I had absolutely no clue that was going on, or you even thought that, or that I did that. And, I was just running my errands.
It's so true. Absolutely. And I'm sure the listeners can relate to this as well. Just start to think, as I said earlier, we create stories. We have 10,000 thoughts to 70,000 thoughts that pop in our head a day. And most of the time we are attaching a thought, an idea with that. So so just speaking about now empowerment, how have you felt, for your letting your audience know, how has that made you feel now understanding this and implementing it?
Well, being able to understand this has made me, it's really gotten to a lot of the root and what was causing me to feel the way I was feeling, because it was all these stories about myself and what was going on. And I realized that I had very much of a victim mentality, and being able to start taking responsibility for the choices I made in my life or the way my life was, that's empowered me more than like anything, of like, okay, well, what did I do that led to this? And some of the things, it's like, well, what did I do? It's maybe I allowed somebody to treat me a certain way, or maybe I made a decision that put me in that place, or maybe I didn't say something. So being able to say, like, okay, this is my part. Not everybody's got, part, everybody's got a part in things, and some responsibility. So it's like, okay, well, what am I responsible for? Where's my accountability? And that gave me power, because once I was able to see that, then I could change things.
Mhm.
And
Yeah, it's
so
one.
that's what I work to help people with, is to start taking responsibility. See where you're allowing this or creating this situation.
And how has anyone around you noticed the difference, or family members? And how, what is that domino effect?
Yeah, I'm not sure when people started to notice it, but it seemed like it was pretty early on that people were like, I'm seeing so much change in you. You seem happier. My brother actually has made a lot of comments to me. At one point he was telling me, he's like, you used to be really negative. It was almost like really like comfortable to be around you. I didn't want to be around you because you were so negative. And I was like, wow, I was like, I didn't even know that about myself. I didn't realize that I was negative. Um, I thought I was always kind of, the one that was like trying to look at the silver lining and everything. Um, but now I actually like feel it instead of and pretending that that's what's happening. So just the more that I do the work, the more changes that other people acknowledge, I feel it all the time. And that's something that's great is like, it doesn't matter whether or not other people acknowledge it or see it. I feel it. I feel blessed to like wake up every day. I feel happy. And at the beginning of the book, like I said, like I had thought about going on the antidepressant again and had just decided I was like, that's not what I want to do.
Mm.
And I have not felt that depression ever since then because I just started doing this work and it's changed
Yeah.
everything. It doesn't mean like every day I'm like, you know, uh, so happy and excited, but in the background, there's always happiness. That's like my baseline now is the happiness. So it's like I can feel a challenging feeling or be sad about something, but underneath it, I'm still happy.
Mm. I love that. Change the way we see things and the things we see change. And I'm a very visual person. Some of you out there might be great with auditory or kinesthetic, maybe you're auditory digital. I'm very visual, so I have to be careful. I walk in, my husband would say, "Oh, vacuum." So I'm not going to say, "Wow, you didn't do the corners." I might go, "Oh, great job," and I can see that's shiny somewhere. And perhaps I'll do the edges, and the next time I might just say, "Oh, don't forget our corners." Um, so that we can keep those situations up, and because I get to see it all, and it's a blessing and a curse at times, especially when reading body language, because it's very subjective. People say, "Oh yes, I've learned body language, I can read others," but the thing is, it's very subjective. You could be rolling your eyes because you're thinking of something else, not because you're rolling them at me with something I've said. It's that curiosity. It's like you said, it's asking more questions, and then you actually find out the real answers. So as we start to wrap up, I'm looking at taking the first steps to rise. So you have given us 3 empowerment tips for rising, and I'd love to go through those with you. The first one is ask yourself, what story am I telling? And is it 100% true? Because you said every spiral begins with this.
Yeah. So it goes back to what I was talking about is like you can't create a new story, a new thought, and put it over a lie. So we have to look at where is this new reframe of what I'm trying to do? Where is it not true? So is it not true? Maybe I'm using the words like always, never, sometimes. If we get rid of those words, or we get rid of the always and look at sometimes, that can be more true. So you want
Yeah.
to come up with a statement that is more true. It doesn't have to
Mm.
become 100% true, but more true than what you had before. And so if it's something like I'm not good enough, which was my
Mm.
story, and looking at maybe like I'm not good at this thing versus me as a person is not good enough. And so
Mm.
then that changes. It's like, okay, like, yeah, I could admit I'm not good at that, or I'm not great at that, or I'm just starting out at that. I'm learning that versus I have to be perfect at something.
Yeah. I love that. So, ask yourself, what story am I telling? What just popped into your head? What is that? And is it here 100% true? Is that true? And perhaps that person has done that before, but are they doing it now? We've got to have that benefit of the doubt there as well. Identify what in the story is not true, looking at those actual facts, like you said, fear, meaning, because it's interesting, there's 3 fears of everyone, I don't belong, I'm not good enough, I'm not loved. And a lot of this happens before the age of 9, but we stick with some of those things because someone said it to us. It was a feeling, it was a story that we made up. Naming what is not true softens the emotional charge and reveals your actual truth. I love that. I think I wrote down something, give grace in the stories because you have lived them for a long time, and be soft with them. Don't have to be so harsh with them. But you know that you can look for the truth within there. Choose the truest version you can believe today and practice it. I love that. Let's speak about that one.
Yeah. So as I said, it's like if you can see where something in the statement is not true, and we can get to something that feels truer, then just start um, plugging that in when these stories come up, like reframing and using that line, whatever it might be. So, as I said, for me, it was I'm not good enough. Instead of that, looking at, okay, I'm not great at this. I, I struggle with this. And then just
Yeah.
sticking with that and looking at one thing instead of making it apply to everything,
Yeah.
making it an absolute, or, I wasn't good at it this time.
Yeah. Yeah. And can you give us an example? I'm going to put you on the spot of maybe even yesterday or maybe today, maybe a thought came through before the podcast. Was there anything that because we have to do this all the time. It's not just once a day. We have to continually be present and pause and change it. Well, give me an example of today, something that you had to give some presence and thought to, and that may not have been true.
Well, so I played pickleball this morning and wasn't necessarily so that I could say like I wasn't playing my best, but that's not true because I was actually doing great. I just wasn't winning games. And
Mm,
so that's like a thought right there of like, oh, I'm doing bad or I'm not good at this. The real story was just not winning games today. Like my
mhm.
playing was great. I was like able to do things I hadn't done before. I was very strategic,
Wow.
was more on point. But, it could maybe be that I was playing with someone who else wasn't doing great or wasn't their best day or whatever. But it doesn't mean something about me. It just means in that moment, that's what was happening. I am my skills are constantly improving. And so
Wow.
that's different stories of
Great.
just like what our abilities are.
Great. Good example. I absolutely love it. I thought you were going to say something like with the podcast. Are we filming it? Is it just voice? Right. What do I have to do? No, that's great. Really good example. And this happens, doesn't it? And you see tennis players, oh gosh, I made that mistake, I made that mistake, and then they fall down this spiral until their mind shifts and they can come back into the game. And I think that's like life, some days in business, it's not as great as other days in business. It doesn't necessarily mean you were bad.
Yeah.
Um,
All right, let's shut down the business because it didn't go well today.
yeah, yeah. Okay, what can I do tomorrow to make a better difference? Standing in the truth of my rise. On page 206, you've got from a woman's transformation begins the moment she finally stops gripping her old stories and lets them fall to ash. What rises from those ashes is not a new version of her, but the truest one, the one who had been waiting beneath the layers all along. My rise taught me how to lead myself, and that became the foundation for how I now lead others. And I love that, you've got it from ashes, and you do talk about that. And of course, you're Ashley. So, great, great use of that word as well. It really takes us on that journey. So I'm going to roll this die, and whatever number it lands on, I'm going to ask you that corresponding question for your number. Are you ready?
Yes.
What number do you want it to be?
5.
Oh, four. Close. It started with an F. All right, let's have a look at four. The joy question. Here we go. This one's for you. What's one simple thing that instantly brings you back to yourself?
Grounding. So really actually getting myself out into nature, touching the earth, putting my feet in the grass. I'm very big into grounding. So oftentimes, like if I just am feeling really off, something I can't handle something, or whatever it might be, I will just go walk in the earth, whether it's dirt, grass, even concrete, like helps. Just barefoot touching something.
Thank you for sharing that. So that's another great tip, isn't it? Sometimes just grounding ourselves, and each day, in actual fact, I will do it some stage during the day. If I'm finishing work late, before I walk into the house, I'll look up at the stars, kick off the shoes, and stand in the ground for a moment. Boy, oh boy, it makes you feel amazing. So before we move on, is there anything else that you would like to let our listeners know?
So I have a mentorship program, as we talked about. It's called In Her Power. And I also have a podcast live right now called In Her Journey. And it's the patterns, it's the truth about the patterns that shape us and the rise into our power. And every other week I talk about a different pattern that's running our life and kind of name them and see how they play out.
Wow, that is going to be exciting to hear. And where can we listen to that?
It's on Spotify and Apple.
Okay, and it's called In Her Power,
In Her Journey.
In Her Journey. Sorry, I'm just looking at your sign there behind you.
It's
In Her Journey, jump onto that podcast with Ashley. And of course, in the book, you will find out so much more because we like to touch on things that's not necessarily all in here. So, but I will leave you with this last quote as we say goodbye to this episode. Your wings do not appear when life gets easier. They appear when you finally stop carrying what was never yours to hold. Isn't that beautiful? Your wings do not appear when life gets easier. They appear when you finally stop carrying what was never yours to hold. So thank you so much, Ashley. We hope you loved this episode, and bye for now, and keep empowering. Speak soon.